So, it's time to return to my favorite mod in HOI4, Black Ice. This time as the United Kingdom. Don't worry, it's just as stressful as the Soviets, with the added variable of your problems being spread out all across the globe. At least there are breaks for the Soviets when it's wintertime, but as the British, it's a consistent struggle to keep up with every problem going on. Still, as a seasoned player with 3 campaigns done, I felt confident in challenging myself by using mod options to boost the production of the Axis in Japan, but also the Soviets so they could keep up. The UK has a large focus tree to help deal with this war that will test your game knowledge, because there are a lot of noob traps to fall in if you don't pay attention. For those who aren't familiar with Black Ice, this mod has a different resource system. There are raw resources you extract and refine into war materials with factories you build, along with grain you use to make food for your people. You also have this much larger tech tree with research slots restricted to certain branches, and since I'm the UK, I have to keep track of all of it and stay up to date on all of these techs, which was not tedious at all. The interwar period for the UK is just a lot of staring, so there isn't much to show. Churchill is ranting that Germany's gonna start a war with us, but Halifax says their leadership is pretty chill, so nobody really wants to mobilize. In 1938, I was doing a vibe check on the German industry and seeing where they were compared to where I was, and it made me very scared. So when Czechoslovakia was on the chopping block and asking me what we can do to stop Germany, there was only one valid answer.
We? We.
In 1939, I still felt pretty behind. I'm just getting the units together to hold Africa, while Germany continues to expand and their military production completely dwarfs mine. In April 1939, after the Sino-Japanese War started and Germany has now annexed Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Memel, there is finally enough tension for me to go early mobilization. Which I don't get at all. You're telling me the world saw Germany annex 2 nations and Japan declare war on China, and we're like nothing ever happens. But when Germany takes over the city of Memel, now we're like... don't even get that much time to take advantage of our mobilized economy, because the war starts in August and Poland is gonna do as well as you would expect. But to show my solidarity with Poland, I got my 1 tank division and launched an attack on Germany. Yeah, I might as well been doing TikTok dances on the Maginot, but those whiny Poles can't say I didn't try anything. I mean, it's really their fault for putting their country between Germany and Russia. Like, what were they expecting? If you ignore the whole Poland thing, it really is the piece of our time for a while. I mean, both sides have to still hate each other and pretend we're at war, but we don't really want to fight. It was a good vibe. We just shoot our guns in the air to justify getting the soldier pay, then go into patreon.com/thatguyfromcollege to support the real hero for making these quality videos for you to enjoy. Checking on the Luftwaffe continues to make me sweat, because I don't even have 1,500 fighters yet, and the Germans can easily match that and swarm me with bombers. In April, the war starts to feel pretty real, with the Germans going for Denmark and Norway. Denmark goes exactly as you'd expect, but I see a chance to actually do a proper fight for Norway. So I send my finest, Poles, to fight the good fight over there. They may have failed their own country, but I'm giving them a second chance to defend someone else's. The Polish barely arrive in Norway as the Germans hit the beaches. And since they were so outnumbered, they struggled to hold against those Germans, so I had to hope the limited amount of air support I could send to Norway could even the odds in the fight. As the Poles tried to push away the Germans, they started another offensive into Western Europe, so I had to scramble the BEF quickly into Belgium, while I also sent some British reinforcements to Norway to help the Poles out since they were slacking on the job. Thanks to that support, the Norwegians were containing the Germans, and they only held onto 1 small port. The BEF was popping off against Germany and Norway, but in Western Europe it was a completely different story. It looked to me that the Belgium line died immediately, and I had to scramble to get those divisions out of that country before they were encircled. They didn't even have time to reform a different line. France was a sinking ship, and all the Brits had to do was make their getaway before it was too late. I made the infantry run to the UK while the tanks made their getaway to Africa. But despite my best efforts, not everyone was able to leave France, and a few courageous Brits had to make their last stand around Paris. So while the Battle of France was a complete failure and we barely stalled the Germans, Battle of Norway was an amazing success where I actually did better than I thought I would. With the French pretty much dealt with, the rat Mussolini scurried into the war, and so began a problem that would haunt me the rest of the game: submarines. As we fight to defend Egypt from the Italians, Chamberlain is feeling really bad about how well his foreign policy decisions have turned out. They're calling him a failure, incompetent, a joke, and the worst part is, they're right. So they get an alcoholic in. After the Battle of France came the Battle of Britain. The Germans weren't joking around with their air force and brought everything they could to make me suffer. The RAF just didn't have the numbers to fight off all these planes. By autumn, we were looking chopped. The Axis is planning naval invasions of me. I'm below 800 regular fighters and can only contest one air zone. By 1941, my Battle of Britain status is... I just have to hope the experience I'm using to upgrade my fighters is going to turn the tide for me, as the Germans bomb more and more of my airplane factories. As for the Italians in Africa, well, since I had to pull my air from Egypt, they took El Alamein and I had to immediately counterattack. East Africa is a bigger pain since I have no supply, while the Italian puppet state gives their troops infinite supply. The Italians tried to naval invade Britain, but they literally chose the most defended port. I couldn't even do that much damage to the Axis fleets in the channels because every time I go out there, a swarm of Stukas descend on me. Then I had a brilliant idea. Instead of fighting the German Air Force, I just let them bomb me and put all my factories on new upgraded fighters. This, combined with the state AA I built, put the air war a lot more in my favor. Africa was also tilting into my favor, with my tank divisions able to dislodge the Italians from their defensive positions. The Italians still tried to do naval invasions of me, and I just let them try because as soon as they came at me, I sent my fleet out to get the freest kills of my life. Germany tried again to invade Norway, but their heart really wasn't in this invasion. Once they encountered the Poles, they should have known they weren't leaving these beaches alive. Also, the worst of the Blitz was over, and I could finally start rebuilding all the factories the Germans bombed. For the first time in a while, I was actually having hope. The Italians tried again to invade the Isle of Man just to get blown up again by the Royal Navy. I was making decent progress in pushing into Ethiopia, but with Barbarossa happening and the Soviets looking like they were having a rough start, I needed to pick up the pace. 3 months later, the front has barely changed, and I feel like Sisyphus fighting here. I try to push with my tanks, but the terrain and supply are just so bad, my tanks are looking like this at the end of a battle, and I just get pushed back. In December, when I'm still in East Africa, Japan declared war on me, and I got nothing to stop them. The East Indies are a lost cause, and I just gotta hope that the Indians can hold themselves. In February 42, though, I finally have a victory to report back home. The tanks managed to not only get a breakthrough in Ethiopia, but maintain it long enough to take Addis Ababa and capitulate Italian East Africa. This cut off a bunch of Italian troops, and some Danish ones for some reason. Really not beating the collaborator allegations with this one. As we helped the Soviets with Operation Countenance, I checked in on them, and it seemed like they formed an excellent line against the Germans. They were even pushing the Finns back, so it seemed like Stalin was kind of managing, but I still had to do my part. After East Africa, I had to deal with some really tedious stuff. So, for some reason, Black Ice changed how you get the French colonies from Vichy France. You do a focus, which starts a limited war, and then you have to send troops to occupy the colonies. Even though it's France's colonies, you have to do all the work because de Gaulle has other plans. But with my tanks freed up from East Africa, it was time to push the Italians out of Egypt. No armor and no supplies, they didn't have a chance against me. And their army corps in Egypt was completely overrun. The Italians had nothing to stop my tanks, and I drive through eastern Libya without a care in the world. But I couldn't have joy for too long because I get word that Japan is trying to invade the Middle East. My tanks were keeping the initiative going in Libya despite running low on supplies. They took Benghazi, and this renewed their offensive to be able to keep going west and surround more Italian soldiers. Mussolini would keep sending troops to slow me down, but they couldn't form a solid line to stop me. Now, you may be wondering why it's November 42 and there is no Operation Torch yet, and that's because we still haven't retaken enough French colonies, like French Guiana. Notice how there's 19 Dutch divisions standing right next to it and not moving in. They're waiting for me to do it. Really just makes me want to go up to the Dutch leadership and just, do something. The Japanese land in East Africa, forcing me to go back there to fight, which just feels like... My Marines arrived to take Guyana since the Dutch were just too busy to do it, and I'm free to move on. I have to go back across the Atlantic to take Gabon next, and very cool that my Marines going through the Congo can't strat redeploy through the territory because it's total anarchy here. I had to help out the Belgians, or else it would have taken me 5 months to walk across the Congo. The Soviets pop off on the Eastern Front by taking out Finland, and I love the humiliation of only allowing them to exist on the Åland Islands. All this other stuff happening distracted me from my offensive in Libya, so I needed to get back on track. The tanks rushed towards Tripoli, but I'd given Italy too much time to bolster the defenses here, so we were struggling to push away the Italian troops. With the liberation of Gabon, America felt confident enough to start Operation Torch, which gave them units in North Africa and got us back all the remaining Vichy colonies. This was the signal to get a move on in Libya, and the tanks busted through the Italian lines. With the fall of Tripoli, the Italians struggled to regain their footing, and my tanks are racing through Tunisia to take North Africa, since the Americans just can't do it. With North Africa taken, you'd think I'd be free to start my invasion plans for Europe. But actually, this whole time Japan had dedicated itself to the Middle Eastern and African front over trying to take out India or Australia. And despite me having several fleets raiding their supplies in the Western Indian Ocean, I have worse supply in Iraq than they do. I just don't understand HOI4 supply. The Italians get infinite supply from their puppet in East Africa, but Iraq doesn't give me any unless I build a railroad, which Black Ice is gonna make me take 4 months to build. This isn't the only thing I'm doing, fortunately. I am trying to take Sicily with the Marines. I launched what should be an easy landing, but I gotta say, I really despise all these extra sea zones they added in the Mediterranean. Makes escorting convoys so much harder, with the Italians sniping some of my marine convoys. I did remember I could get around the expensive cost of level 1 railroads by just making each province its own project, but with landing in Italy, I just pulled the tanks away from Iraq because I felt they'd be better used in Italy. Despite my difficulties in the Mediterranean, I was convinced I could kill Italy soon. The Marines planned another landing around Naples, where they could create a beachhead, and the tanks would follow them up to sweep over the Italian troops. The rough shores of southern Italy weren't easy to take, but with air support and shore bombardment, the Marines managed. The tanks arrived next and rushed across the mountains to the Adriatic Sea, but the Italians were surprisingly resistant. I was expecting an Italian surrender event, but no, despite leading their country to failure, the Italian people loved Mussolini. They even managed to start pushing me back in places, which was really confusing. 350 cast bombers flying over them, and the Italians just don't care. I had a new army training in the UK, and hopefully those reinforcements would be just what this front needed, because it was not getting any better around Naples. When the new infantry divisions arrived, I wanted to attempt another invasion of Italy around Rome to take the pressure off around Naples. While this planned, I noticed that I was running out of convoys, and I realized there are a lot of naval battles off the coast of Britain. But it wasn't by who you'd expect. Apparently, we had the Battle of Midway off the coast of Ireland. Does the Pacific just not matter to Japan at all? Because it seems like their only directive is to make my game worse. The invasion of East Africa had me on edge, but putting their fleet in the Atlantic is just too much. As for the invasion of Rome, well, what should have been an easy landing is ruined by 7 submarines. They took away my shore bombardment, making the invasion take longer, and ruining everything. If only Hitler just sent a couple submarines to Utah Beach, the Americans would have never landed. I coped with that failure by invading Sardinia, and thankfully, this went a lot better for me. I made sure none of those defenders were leaving that island, and I was pretty surprised with how much damage I'd done to the Italians, and also how many losses I'd taken. You may think it's pretty embarrassing that it's May 1945 and I haven't done a D-Day yet, but I have a good excuse. You see, I ran out of convoys and food, so I checked my navy to see all my convoy escorts are gone. The Japanese fleet came back to fight in the Battle of Atlantic, and I'm just like,
and why is he here? He lost.
So it's up to me to make sure I never see the Imperial Navy again here. I keep attacking that fleet again, and again, and again, and again, so hopefully they will take a hint and stop trying to come into the Atlantic. Don't judge me too much, guys, but I never checked the coast of France to see what was there, and when I see how free this landing would be after struggling for 2 hours around Italy, I can't say I had a very proud expression on my face. I completely pulled out of Italy and prepared to land everything in France. Those poor garrison troops probably had a panic attack when they saw what was coming at them. The Germans didn't have much to stop me in the area, so my marines and tanks spread out all across France, easily handling the few Germans they did have to stop me. The Americans were also kind enough to support me too, so they can actually say they did something in the war. When I reached Paris, I finally started to see a German response to what I was doing here. They brought a lot of tanks that looked a lot better than mine, but that's on me for not bothering with research for the past year and a half. And you may think I'm stupid for slacking on that, but when you've been spending 8 hours playing HOI4 Black Ice, in one day, you'd get it. Things start slowing down in France, but I'm not at a complete standstill. The British army pushes towards the Rhine, and I destroy thousands of German tanks, and thankfully in the east, Stalin has taken advantage of my push to get the Wehrmacht out of Russia. The Germans commit more to the west to stop me, giving more opportunities in the east for the Soviets to pop off. I make a big play in southern France and encircle a few German troops, weakening the Reich so much they can't even afford port garrisons of their own country, which the Americans took advantage of. It only took till 1946 for them to launch their own European naval invasion, but at least they did it now. We had spread Germany so thin they couldn't maintain a solid front line anywhere, meaning they were dying everywhere. My tanks pushed through the Benelux region to meet up with the American invasion, and with no Luftwaffe to contest us, the tanks steamrolled over any German who dared to raise a rifle against me. Seeing that all the hard work to defeat fascism in Europe had been done, Turkey emerged from the shadows to say that they always hated Germany and joined the Allies. We cut off many German troops and spread out over Germany to take their major cities. I took a second to look at the casualties, and as you can see, this was not an easy war for me, but it's been worse for my enemy, so that's what really matters. Speaking of stuff that really matters, I got into Berlin first, which felt so good after 9 hours of playing. Now it was just a matter of securing the rest of Germany's cities as the Soviets approached from the east. There wasn't any organized resistance, so I was just sending tanks to snake VPs until the Reich finally croaked. Italy still counted as a major in the Axis, so I had to take them out too, but against the combined power of all the allied nations, they folded like cardboard. I was beyond caring about the peace deal, so I just let the AI cook, and they gave me an abomination. Italy and Japan's faction, the Reich still existing in Austria, and just Poland. Yeah, I think I'm done here. Hope you guys enjoyed the British experience in Black Ice. It was a marathon to get here, and I'm glad I came out victorious. If you made it this far, you might as well like the video, or else Bomber Harris will give your city the Dresden Special. If you're in the mood for something different, I made a RimWorld video about the new DLC Anomaly, where I fight supernatural beings and get superpowers, so check that video out if it sounds interesting. Big thanks to my alumni on Patreon. If you can, please support me on there so I can focus on making quality videos for y'all instead of algo slop. There will be more content to come, so hopefully I'll see you all again soon. Bye bye!